welcome to another episode of Oops All Dragons. It's me, your boy, Lissa.
It's Faroon.
And we've got just sort of a freeform kind of general topic that we wanted to talk about. No, I haven't done any research. This is gonna be off the dome, so I'm gonna say some shit and I'm gonna be wrong and it's gonna be fine. Nobody's gonna correct me.
It's okay to be wrong.
It's fine. It's happened before and it's gonna happen again. But before we get into it, Varun, hi.
Hey.
What you been up to, buddy?
I have been working through the pile of shame of Gunpla. Any Gunpla builder has a pile of shame. I just finished the Geminas 01, the Geminas 02, and the packs to go with them. And the Real Grade God Gundam and the expansion pack for that. So, not just straight building, panel lining, all that stuff as well. Working through the pile of shame, really. That's what I've been dedicating my life to the last couple of weeks. I make a lot more progress when I just decide not to play video games anymore.
Yeah. Who'd have thought that there's only so much time in a day?
Yeah, like when I was playing Hollow Knight, I'm like, or you know, I remember Hollow Knight because it took me so damn long, but when I was focusing on it, I was like, okay, you got this. And this is me with video games in general. When I really want to beat them, like I'm just gonna concentrate on that. I'm not gonna do any other things. I'm not gonna build Gunpla. I'm not gonna do anything else. Just gonna beat Hollow Knight or whatever it is. So now I've just been turning all that energy. I'm just plowing through these models, and it helps that I only build the 1/144th scale models, not the really big ones. So it's just a big pile of things that eventually get pretty small. Give me a couple days, I'll build you a high grade or a real grade, and then get it up and done. So that is what I've been doing. What about you, Lissa?
I've been working on my own pile of shame. Any crafter knows that when you take on any craft, leatherwork, woodwork, sewing, paper, paint, any of it, you just get a pile. You just become a hoarder for supplies. And you're like, oh, I have so many ideas. I'm gonna do so much with this, and then you end up with, an overwhelming amount of supplies and so many ideas, and then you get like paralysis, and then you do nothing with it for months at a time. And
I've hit that before, yeah.
That's what you're talking about with your Gunpla. So my version of Gunpla is a pile of fabric,
a pile that looks like literal trash until you turn it into something nice.
Well, hey, I keep it organized.
Okay, fine.
Speak for yourself.
A pile of organized fabrics.
Yeah, beautifully categorized by fiber content, amount of the fabric that I have, what I plan to do with it, how much it cost. I have a system, but I think I spend too much time maintaining the system and not enough time actually pulling those fabrics out and doing anything with them. So I'm working on some stuff, and it helps that I have like other crafter friends who try to keep me, on task with that, and we're giving each other deadlines, and that's fun.
That's good.
Yeah. I drove past, so right by my apartment is the Paramount studio, and I drove past the Writers Guild picket line.
Oh,
basically, at every major studio here in LA, there is a picket line for the Writers Guild of America, who are currently on strike, which good for them. Honestly, it feels like every time the writers go on strike, stuff actually happens. So let's hope this one also shakes out in favor of workers, because good God, the failed strike of 2021 was a thing for real. Was that? Yeah, that was 2 years ago. That was nuts.
There was a writer's strike in 2021?
Not a writer's strike. There was a general IATSE strike.
Okay.
That was, it never went through. It never went went to strike, but the strike, like, basically the contracts were being renegotiated, and a couple of the IATSE unions voted in
What
favor
is that for
of
the
striking.
listeners, by the way?
Oh, it's basically, IATSE is like the conglomeration of a bunch of different unions that represent different departments that and trades that work in like
filmmaking,
media production. So like not just film, but TV and stage as well.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on. What does IATSE stand for again? I forget.
You're the Hollywood person.
Listen, it's the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees.
Okay.
So movie picture technicians, artists, and allied crafts. So IATSE has different like locals, and each local represents like a different like subset. So, for example, the one that I'm trying to get into is the 705, which is the costumers union. Yeah. It's the motion picture costumers union, and that represents like not the designers, because the designers have the Designers Guild, something to do with basically like guilds and unions are different for some reason, I don't know, but they're all still represented under IATSE. And yeah, a couple years ago there was like a contract renegotiation situation, and like we got approval to like, hey, if they're still not giving us what we want, we're gonna strike. And I guess the threat of the strike made them come to a certain agreement. But honestly, nobody liked the contract that came out of it. There should have been a strike. There should have been it would have been literally like one of the biggest strikes in the film industry's history. It might have been even like the biggest strike in like U.S. labor history if that strike had like actually happened, because it was multiple unions and it was like across the U.S. It was a massive sword of Damocles, and like at the end of the day, the contract that the union reps and the producers came to was still not good. Because at that point we were fighting for basically like decent turnover time and hours, and like pay raises, and like there was things in there about production assistance as well. There was a whole bunch of bullet points of stuff that needed addressing that just didn't get addressed. And yeah, it's like on the one hand I'm glad it didn't go through, because then I was able to still continue working, but on the other hand I'm like, that it would have been nice for that strike to have happened, so that's the contract that would have gone through would have been actually like recognizing the humanity of the people who work in this industry. But can't have it all.
That's the thing. That's the thing with union actions, because or worker actions in general, sometimes even the threat of it is enough to get management or landlords or whoever it is to move on certain things. But yeah, it's not always the best outcome, and sometimes the strike is better, but it just strikes are hard, man.
Yeah, it's a thing. So right now, like, I've been continuing trying to find work in the industry, and now I just like there's no point. There's no work, because there's something that happened, because there have been writer strikes before, like infamously there's one in like the mid 2000s. There's one in the 90s. Pretty sure. I
remember mid 2000s because that killed Heroes.
That killed Pushing Daisies.
Yeah,
that's what killed Pushing Daisies too. And yeah, writer strikes are just specifically hard because, like, if you don't have a script and like you don't have people in there to like edit and revise and update and do that stuff, like writers do a lot even during production, not just during pre-production. And like without writers, there's nothing to shoot. So then no one has work. And like it's affecting a lot of people. It's gonna be, and like infamously, like writer strikes can last months. So yeah,
that's the weird, because like with a strike in general, especially in the United States, to be effective, it's got to work at a lever of power in some way. And for writers, it's without them, nothing else can move forward. But then it affects so many other people down the line. So the strike goes on. They're going to get, stipends and stuff from their unions because of the strikes going on. But like, there's going to be a lot of dominoes that are going to fall for this, because they're not like an essential service. You don't need TV. People really like it, and people are going to clamor for it.
It's not about it. The thing is that like the way that at least the industry works nowadays, it's not even about the consumer. It's about the investors.
Exactly.
And if there's no product, then the investors lose money. So it's in the investors' interest to comply with the writers' demands, because without the writers, there's no product, and without a product, there's nothing to sell, and without anything to sell, you're not getting your return on investment. There's also
because I believe this happened
the
during the
consumer
last
doesn't even factor into it.
That's what I'm saying. Versus like a rail strike or a firefighter strike, in you see those in Europe or something like that. Like those are essential services that go on strike, that directly impacts the public, that type of thing. Versus this is purely like affecting the bottom line of some people, which is when we talk about the shows. That's why these can go on for kind of months, because they already have some things that are done, some things that are going to come out, and then some things that people may have been looking to cut, now they have excuses to cut if their ratings start to drop and that sort of thing.
It's an interesting time, and we're gonna see. It's gonna just also because like the way that rollout for stuff works, the effects on the consumer side of this are not really going to be felt until after it's resolved. There's going to be like a weird gap of like stuff that randomly gets canceled or just stops being produced, or just like go, or there's months between like episode releases, or like stuff will be delayed by months. And like on the release end of things, you're not going to maybe feel that weird wave of things missing for a while. Yeah,
it'd have to be a long strike to be like...
And because nowadays everything is like, released all in one go, or, it's not like that episodic weekly thing that we grew up with.
On some platforms,
you're not really they certain things get released weekly, but you're not gonna feel... I feel like it's not gonna feel the same. It's not gonna impact the same way. And also there's just such a glut of content to be consumed that like
that's true.
You might not feel that there has been an ebb of stuff.
Yeah, I think folks who are like purely streaming these days probably won't feel it that much, but folks who still watch, like regular TV and that sort of thing, probably will.
Yeah, and like certain things, I don't know. Like we're not gonna see the same thing that happened in the '90s, where like Next Generation had a couple of episodes that were written by fan submissions because there was a writer's strike. Like there were straight up episodes of, I think, of Next Generation and I think DS9, I could be wrong.
I think part of me knew this.
That like there were some episodes, and if I'm not mistaken, there were like some pretty iconic episodes that were written by fan submissions. And there are people who became writers because their submissions were taken and put into production during a writer's strike. And then like that got them further work. Like that got their name in there. Like it's a thing. And I feel like that's not going to happen right now. Like where like
you mentioned Star Trek. That's the other thing I've been doing, actually catching up on Star Trek Picard, the last season of that, which my short mini review of Star Trek Picard as a whole, seasons 1 and 2, not very good. You can pretty much skip them. And then season 3 completely like redeems the entire thing. It's written by completely different people, and it's awesome, and it ignores the first 2 seasons as much as they can. I would highly recommend it if you're a fan of Next Gen. Just skip the first 2 seasons, just go to the third one, and then just jump straight into it, and you get to see Old Man Worf and Riker and Troy, and everybody comes back. It's awesome. It is absolutely nostalgia bait, but you know what? It's very well written. It has a good story. Everyone has a thing to do. Good little season of TV.
Yeah, that's it. That's been my life. Is just sort of like being concerned about the strike and kind of sticking my head in the sand and working on not buying fabric and making stuff instead.
Turning it into things.
Yeah, who'd have thought?
All right.
But speaking of, during one of my projects that I worked on recently, I had a lot of hand sewing to do, and I ended up having a miraculous span of time that never happens where I got to actually watch some television. And I watched a show that is not new. It's been on my Netflix to watch list for a long time, and I've been like sort of dancing around it for a long time. It's a show called Invisible City. That's it's a Netflix show that is actually like written and made and produced in Brazil, like by Brazilian writers and stuff. It's a Brazilian show that's produced by Netflix.
Netflix is the least Brazilian thing about it.
Yeah, basically. It follows this guy, wife gets fridged, and he ends up having to interact with a bunch of Brazilian mythological creatures, which got me thinking about my old D&D campaign where I was...
Tried to do some of this.
Yeah, I tried to bring in mythological creatures from Brazilian myth and from other, mostly from Brazilian myth, but I had plans to, we never got to it, but I had plans to bring in creatures from other mythologies that don't usually get explored in tabletop, and I wanted to talk about it, just because I feel like we maybe get in a rut of dragons, you know? And
specifically European dragons.
Yeah, European style dragons. We get stuck in this rut of like Greek and Norse mythological creatures, and as cool as they are, and as much as I love me, you know, a giant wolf or whatever.
Your cat's name's Smaug.
Yeah, please. I love me a dragon. I love a unicorn. I love a like Western creature. But also, all around the world, people have been making up little guys to be scared of forever. And I love the idea of bringing them into the game just to spice it up a little bit. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to mix it up, to throw new things at potentially new things at the players that they may not recognize, or reskinned old things, but with a new flavor to them.
Yeah, that's a big thing, is like, because the game I was running, I knew that those guys are nerds. I mean, obviously we're all fucking nerds, like that's kind of the point, but like, as in like, a lot of my friends are people who grew up with like those dragonology and mythology books, and like were reading Percy Jackson and like that kind of thing. So they're familiar with this certain set of mythological creatures. So you describe a creature with a lion's body and the snake, a tail that's a snake, and a griffin's head, or like an eagle's head. They all already know that what it is, right? It's a chimera, or it's a whatever, like
manticore.
A manticore, a chimera, oh god, what's the one with the riddles?
A sphinx.
A sphinx, yes. You start to describe one of these creatures, and most people that you play with, they're gonna kind of already have an idea, even if they don't know like the exact stat blocks in the monster manual, but they already have an idea of how these creatures work. So what I wanted to do, just so that they actually have to like
think
work.
and discover.
There's actually there's actual discovery happening, not just for the player characters, but for the players themselves, bringing in underutilized mythologies.
So let's use Brazil as a starting point here, because you have direct, not only through the show, but through your life.
My upbringing, yeah. So I'll keep using that campaign as an example. The main creature that you guys got to see, because Varun, you were in that game.
Yeah, you found you threw some stinky thing at us.
Yeah. So we have this in the Amazon. We have a rich tapestry of mythology that spans from pre-colonial times to certain creatures that popped up post-colonial, post-colonization. And we have this one creature called the Mapinguari, and it's basically a giant sloth with one eye and a mouth on its stomach, and it's extremely, extremely stinky. And it's terrifying. It's this terrifying creature. It's supposed to be this sort of guardian figure, but it's kind of just a big animal. The stories vary, the mythology varies around it, but it does kind of range for something that has more intelligence to something that doesn't, that is essentially just a giant aggressive sloth. And yeah. And I thought, oh, that's fun. I mean, there are aspects of it that are going to be familiar, big furry creature with big teeth, to be scared of it, but the details of it are a little bit more unfamiliar to the person who didn't grow up where I did,
What's the story behind it? It's just a forest protector type of thing?
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be fearsome, but I remember when we were playing, we beat it, but we didn't kill it. We're we have to take a thing back to the fella who wants us to get him a rare animal, and use this as the rare animal, because the one we wanted would cause a colonization. So
yeah, so I was mixing it, because the original creature you guys were set out to catch was a kelpie. It was a weird horse, which even kelpies I feel are underutilized in fantasy, and I really wish I could see them more. But because I love me a threatening horse. I love a threatening horse.
Threatening water horse.
Yeah, and so you guys were originally supposed to catch a kelpie, which is something that it's niche, but you should still if you're a person who grew up being fascinated by mythology, or had any read any of those mythology based YA books, you've at least come across the concept of it at least once. So it's something still slightly more recognizable, slightly more familiar. And then I threw you guys, for a loop and brought in something entirely.
We kept that around. I feel like we kept that around way longer than you expected, because we didn't kill it. We kept it around, and we just kept trying to big up it, hey, look at our thing, our great thing that we got. Yeah, it's the best.
You guys were supposed to catch the nice pretty horse, and then you guys were no, actually, we don't want to do that. We're gonna find something else. And then the Mapinguari was what you found. And then, so to convince the guy that this big, stinky, scary thing was the perfect gift for this princess, you guys paraded him around town, and he couldn't take it back now.
And you as the DM were just well, this is what we're doing.
No, it was genius, honestly.
All right.
And yeah, so the idea really was, sort of ease you into the unfamiliar. And I think that I've seen people who are a little bit hesitant to leave the confines of the pre-existing monster manual. And then even then, when they do, they still stay within the confines of that, familiar territory of Western mythology. And that sort of the gallery of creatures available where they're in. And there is a lot of really cool, interesting stuff that you can find in that like Western mythology, where like even if you start going towards like Slavic, there's a lot of fun stuff in Slavic mythology other than the Baba Yaga. As a Baba Yaga enjoyer, and like I'd had Baba Yagas in my campaign too, like
Chicken House.
I love me a Chicken House. God damn, it's just a good time. I feel like people should open themselves up to the literal world of options of mythology.
So I've done something similar, and I think you've been in a couple of the campaigns when I did this, where I went to usually really ancient, again, not Western, traditions or legends to make up plot points or creatures or whatever for campaigns that I've gotten. You were the one where you guys had to climb the mountain to discover those gods. So like Chuck and Kukulkan, like ancient Aztec and Olmec, which I maybe some people still follow those things today. So I did my research, not to just like, hey, I'm just gonna throw names out there and do whatever. I'm like, okay, what do these things actually represent? Like, okay, Chuck is for like the technically like the four directions and like water and storms, and Kukulkan is the winged serpent of death. Okay, so I can't do like nice things with him, really. He's kind of got a thing. So I absolutely like am a proponent of this sort of thing, especially in like fantasy and games. You're making up a story. I think it's definitely good to get inspiration from them. Do your research. Definitely do your research, because otherwise you're just kind of like pasting over the kind of stock elements in a game with a different culture's coat of paint, which you have to be careful to not just use it as like a skin over some pre-existing, like, because like a Chinese dragon has a very different like context from like a European dragon, because the European dragons are seen like these things that need to be conquered. They're mostly evil. They hoard wealth, versus like a Chinese Eastern type dragon is like a wise thing. It's like a god in some cases, and it's usually a very good omen to see it. So like they're very different contexts for when you would use them and use that interpretation of them. And just going down, because I got Invisible City on the mind, because you mentioned it, and I watched it through. So like some of these are pretty easy to just like reskin and kind of
like the Kuka, she's sort of she's a witch. Our boogeyman. She's our boogeyman. She's like there's that like that lullaby that she kind of does when in the show. They use it as like a lullaby that she does to like when she's doing her spooky shit. And that's like a lullaby that we use to sing to kids. It's like, go to sleep, little kid, or the Kuka's gonna come get you.
Yeah. Tons of those in internet ad.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, I'll say it again. The world is full of creatures people made up to scare kids into being good. Use them.
They got the Kuka. Is it pronounced Yara, the girl who's just like a mermaid?
Yeah. So Yara, she's kind of a mermaid, water goddess kind of thing. Again, that's one that's like interpreted in many different ways depending on what region of Brazil you're in. So like you can kind of play with that. Fun fact, there was a run of Wonder Woman where like they did different Wonder Women around the world, and then the Brazilian one, she was from the Amazon. Yeah. And her name is Yara, and yeah, it was really great. And if you've read that, then you're actually familiar with them. And if you've read that run, then you might be familiar with the Mapinguari, because at one point she does encounter one. It's literally like the only issue of that I've read.
Inspiration.
It's great. That it made me feel very seen, because I'm like, wow, people, first of all, barely ever acknowledge Brazilians, and second of all, don't acknowledge the Amazon as a place that exists. Yeah, the Amazon is a place and not just the internet website.
It's a place, but it's also it's inhabited by its own indigenous people with their own culture.
Yeah, several cultures. Some that have lived within 100 miles of each other, but have somehow never interacted. Like, it's crazy. And like, there is a lot of like Western mythology about the Amazon. Lost City of Z, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That like it feels like it's a natural progression. If you're a person who does like to go down these rabbit holes, it is a natural progression to ask, like, what about the people who live there? What were the weird things that they believed? How did they explain certain phenomenon? How did they scare their kids into being good? And there's a lot in there. There one of the other creatures that like beings that shows up in the show is the Curupira. The plot of the first season kind of has to do with just sort of bringing him back or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of those creatures that the mythology around him does kind of crop up, like, not due to colonization, but kind of, yeah, like due to colonization and due to, like, basically misuse and malpractice in the forest, of like misuse of resources, and people being greedy, and like hunters being greedy and, like, killing more than they actually need, or cutting down trees where they don't need to, clearing forests, like, so people came up with this being, the Curupira, who's this like indigenous man with backwards feet and his head on fire, who leads hunters and garimperos astray. I don't know like foresters. I don't know, like timber, like the people who do like illegal logging. Yeah. Who lead like loggers and hunters astray in the woods because got backwards feet, and then if they get a little too aggy, he gets aggy too. It's great. It's a great time.
Kills a dude real fast in that first episode.
Oh yeah, and that it's kind of like, the show actually does stay really true to the original legends. For some of the creatures, which I thought was cool. Like
Sassy is
Sassy, that was pretty much like as it was told to me. That show was also
one-legged wind imp, essentially, who you can control if you steal his hat.
Yes, you got it. He's our
That's
trickster.
an awesome character to throw into a game.
Yeah, he's a trickster. So like, in the same way that like people treat certain like fake creatures, like he has that kind of like amoral, like gray morality kind of thing, because his interest is just being kind of a free spirit little shit, where he's like, he's not gonna harm you, but he is gonna inconvenience you.
And like going to the show and just interpreting these legends in different mediums, I think that it's always good to kind of, like I mentioned, do your research, like what is the, like, and kind of what you've been alluding to, what is the purpose of these legends? Were they just originally something that people used to scare their kids into being good, or like the Curupira, did it have essentially an environmentalist message of like, don't ruin the land behind it?
Is it a warning to people to like, is it a warning? Is it, because a lot of these, at least for the Brazilian like mythological creatures, a lot of them are warnings of like, be respectful of the space around you because you share it with not only other people but things beyond yourself.
Yeah, the show does a good job of not like it kind of portrays some of the entities, they call them, but the folklore people essentially as like kind of shady sometimes, but none of them are like out and out evil. The bad guy is like the ghost of like a hunter who was coming in and like killing all the animals and stuff,
and his shitty corporate son.
And his shitty corporate son.
Remember, kids, the enemy is always capitalism.
Yeah, the enemy. I mean, that's exactly it. At least in this case. So like. They interpreted it, they gave them some nuance, and they said like these guys aren't like 100% good, but there's a reason for them to exist. So what's their reason in the world? So if you're going to take a legend, or if you're going to take a folklore or something and throw it into a game, you don't have to keep it 100% as it was, because the interpretations that we saw on this show were pretty modern. Like the mermaid lady can just walk around on land until she gets in the water, then boom, she's a mermaid. So like you can add some modern sensibilities to them on like how they work mechanically and that sort of thing. But what is their purpose? What's their vibe? What is their what are they meant for?
Yeah, there are certain creatures in certain mythologies that are kind of just there to be a cool creature to encounter, or just to like fill space on a map. In the way that like sea creatures and stuff like filled the maps of like Greece and stuff, but there are also in all of these mythologies, even the ones that we are familiar with and the ones that we aren't, there are a lot of these creatures that have like intelligence and purpose, and you might want to be careful to not just use them as like filler in a dungeon.
Cannon fodder.
Cannon fodder. Like you can. I'm not gonna say you can't. But I think in anything that you do, even in the monsters existing in the monster manual, when you put certain creatures on, if you're going to give them the importance of like the attention and the time, like you're asking for your players to come and spend time. So whatever you put in front of them, you want to think about like, why am I asking these people to pay attention to this for the next 3 hours? Why does this matter in the story or outside of it? And I think context is important. On the other hand, also sometimes you just want to fight a mermaid, and that's fine. Sometimes you just want to fight a weird crocodile witch. Which I thought was interesting. In the show, when I was watching the show, Invisible City, like, what I kept coming to mind was there was a show when I was a little kid called O Sítio do Pica-Pau Amarelo, and it was like it's the woodpecker's farm, basically. Okay. And like, the Yellow Woodpecker's Ranch, I guess, is kind of like the direct translation. And it was a kid's show, and the Saci Perere is one of the ones that shows up in that show. The Cuca shows up in that show, and she's this fabulous crocodile lady. I kind of want to post a picture of her on our Instagram. Make a note of that. We'll do that.
Sure.
I want to do like side-by-side comparisons of the Cuca
where they made her all sexy in the show.
Where they make, so like in Invisible City, she's just this woman, right, who like scorned woman, whatever. And she has this like moth theme, but the way that I know her from my childhood, she's a crocodile with like lipstick.
Interpretations.
Oh, and she's fabulous, and she's so good. Yeah, and like on that show, there was also like other mythological creatures that would come in and out. There was also a giant talking pig with a curly mustache. So like, you know, you're gonna take it's you have the same creature. How do you interpret it for a kids show versus a show for adults? How do you interpret, and so when you are running a game and you want to incorporate creatures from different mythologies, think of your tone as well. That's a thing. Yeah, that's absolutely a thing too to consider. Is like, what is the tone of your game? Like, is it something that is going to be taken seriously, or is?
I think in general, I think doing some research lends that flavor that your players are going to grasp onto. Because if it's just like a weird reskinned monster that you've taken from some sort of folklore, but there's no juice behind it of like why it is the way it is, then it's just going to be another mob tier players. But if you say, yeah, this is the protector of the forest, or she's a crocodile witch, you know, that gives them a bit of backstory that they could potentially dig into. Do we want to fight them? Why are they acting the way they are? That type of thing. Yeah,
like, why bother? Like, you can just reskin a monster, but to make it into like a less recognizable thing. But why bother doing it? Like, think about why you're bothering to do that. Like, why do I care that this is not? I don't know.
Not immediately
that this isn't a
recognizable.
Cerberus. Yeah. Why do I care that this is not a Cerberus type 3-headed dog creature, and I'm skinning it as this other like chupacabra kind of thing? Like, why do I care? Why do I care? Why should my players care? Why does it matter for the story? Why does it matter for the game?
I think why does it matter for the story? Why does it matter for the game? Those are like the best questions, because that if you have a, you know, even a decent reason for doing that, then your players get more invested.
And honestly, the reason could be as simple as, this is the flavor I want for my setting. The reason could be as simple as, I don't want my setting to be Western Europe flavored. I want it to be Mexico flavored. I want it to be Caribbean flavored. I don't know. I want it to be curry flavored.
That can also change the tone of
tahine brown or curry brown.
Well, I was trying to make a point. That because that could no that's good, because that could change the tone of your game. Just going back to the interpretations of that, a lot of Western folklore and myths are based around conquering things versus you know, just the Brazilian ones, or a lot of the Caribbean ones in general are, like you say, warnings about the environment, about the world around you themselves. So they're not really like things you conquer, they're things you live with and things you avoid, if anything.
And respect. I think like a good stepping stone for people is like Irish mythology as well. Like the original conception of like the fae creatures is that they're these things that you have to kind of like live around and find ways to sort of cohabitate this world with. It's not something that you are overtaking and subduing. Yeah, it's not something you're subduing. It's something that you're living with. You're leaving offerings out for them. You are being careful to not step into fairy rings. You're being respectful and mindful of their weird customs and codes. So like that's a good way of like, how do these different cultures approach like what role do these creatures serve in maintaining like sort of the rules of society and how people interact with the world around them, and like that can get really heady, and like I feel like I'm getting like maybe too philosophical, even though this is the Getting Philosophical about D&D podcast.
This is the philosophical episode.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's kind of the point of this podcast, was like originally like we would get too philosophical about it, and we wanted to just talk about
there's
it,
some good points here.
Yeah, I say all this to just be like, don't let me make it sound like it's more complicated than it is. It really just comes down to, as Varun keeps repeating, it just comes down to research and mindfulness. And at the end of the day, at the base of it all, it's, will this make my game more fun? Right? Mm-hmm. So,
now that I'm thinking about it, like,
which was why I did it. It was like, I thought it would be more fun if you guys didn't know what the fuck you guys were standing up against.
That is one thing that happened. Yeah. So some weird sloth thing comes along. We're like, what the hell is this? How do we do? Like, none of us instantly knew. Oh yeah, it's this thing with this weakness, and like it can do X, Y, Z. We're like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
How do we even deal with this?
if I describe a basilisk or a Medusa to you, you already know, oh no, I'm in danger of being petrified.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you already know that. That's no fun. I want you to be scared. And you know what makes people scared? Not knowing things.
True. It just hit me, like, as we've been talking, of just, like, how much of, like, a lot of, I'll say, like, European, like, British originating mythology is, like, people conquering things. Like, there's a lot of that in the mythology. Dragons and conquering witches and armies and stuff. Which I guess is them representative of them, not enslaving, but like
subduing,
subjugating, like the pagan, the pagan religions and cultures and that sort of stuff, versus a lot of other Brazilian, I'm from Trinidad, Mexican, a lot of those are about, like, not so much that we beat this guy or we overcame this thing. A lot of them will have some version of, like, good overcoming evil, because like in Hindu mythology and / religion, you've got King Rama defeating Ravan and coming back to the city of Lanka, and we all lights outside of our city, outside of our houses to lead him back home, and that's what Diwali is. So, like, there's always some version, probably like a bigger one, of like good versus evil, but a lot of them are about living with the land, or the non-winner mythologies are just about, like, let's win, or let's live with the land, let's coexist with the land, or how these weird creatures out there that represent certain things, they may or may not be real.
And then, like, those mythologies feed into holidays that are really just time markers. It's how people used to keep time and know that, like, now we're heading into the part of the year where we're gonna plant our food, and now we're gonna head into the part of the year where we're gonna reap what we've sown, and now we're heading into the part of the year where we want to help our animals breed, and this is the best time of the year for us to get weird.
No, it's just hit me, just like, a lot of European, I won't even say Norse, because a lot of Norse mythology does involve a lot of gods, and
it's very Klingon,
very Klingon-y, a lot of battle,
a lot of honor.
I don't know if their thing was like, I'm trying to think if, like, Norse mythology was about conquering, because Norse mythology is about, like, Thor came down.
Norse mythology, as we, like, sort of consume it nowadays in pop culture, you would think that that's what it is, but it is also, like, same with Greek mythology. It's also just, like, a series of, like, stories that explain why certain things happen a certain way, and
some of them are lessons, and some of them are just, like, things that happened.
Yeah. Where there's, like, wasn't it funny that one time when Loki managed to trick that blind guy into killing his brother with a mistletoe branch?
Yes.
And everybody was real mad about it.
And that's why we avoid mistletoe.
Yeah.
Like, there's lightning, so Thor made that.
Yeah, lightning is scary and loud and crazy, so there's gotta be some big, strong, scary guy that's in charge of that.
Yeah, a god made that.
You gotta be
Watch
careful
out
about him. Yeah.
And eventually, there's a giant serpent that encircles the world, and one day it's going to just let loose, and that is when the world is going to end.
Can we talk about giant snakes?
Sure.
Talk about giant snakes?
Sure.
For just, like, a second. I just love that it's one of the things where it's like, if you're a kid who is like me, who, like, would pretend to be sick and stay home and watch, like, History Channel and all the weird, like, mythology and ancient aliens bullshit kind of shows that there was on there, then you're like aware of the like phenomenon of like certain I guess tropes that just show up in mythologies and in ancient cultures all over the world, the cultures that have never had any interaction with each other, and you know, certain shapes that pop up in their architecture and all that stuff. And snakes is one of them.
Pyramids.
Snakes is one of those things. Pyramids is the other thing, but like snakes, and then
you could make a campaign around snakes that I'm thinking about it. Snakes and serpent-like creatures. Because you've got Jormungand for Norse mythology. You've got Kukulkan for like ancient Aztecs. You've got
in Brazil we have the Boyuna, which is a black snake creature that essentially is the protector of like the Amazon River.
He was in the second season.
Oh, spoilers.
It's in the very first episode, the very beginning of the very first episode. In Chinese and a lot of just Asian mythologies, their dragons are very serpent-like. Yeah. You could do a campaign around like the symbology and meaning of like different types of serpents.
Yeah, and a lot of them have to do with this sort of, I don't want to say eldritch, but I guess eldritch is kind of the only word I can think of like, it's this force that is bigger than you, that is just so much bigger than you that you have no choice but to like run away, hide, do what you can to just like escape it until you can't.
Some of them,
I'm trying to
honestly, my interpretation of that is that every country on the world in some way has had snakes, and someone saw a real big snake one day, and you're like, "Oh my god, that's a demon," and they made a legend about it.
Yeah, and then like there's similar of like, you know, places where you find like gators and crocodiles. There's always going to be giant gators and crocodiles.
I have a lot of dragon myths.
Yeah, and that's like, listen, if you're a person who has never seen a snake before, and then you see a snake, yeah, you're gonna think that's some, like, you see a thing with no legs and it's moving. That's gotta be magic. I think
someone in Japan saw a really fucked up snake one time, and they're like, "Oh my god, the snake's got 8 heads. It's the Orochi," when it was probably like multiple snakes just like coiled up together or something.
Yeah.
What are you looking up?
So there's that folkloric festival that happens in Brazil every year in my neck of the woods in the Amazon. It's the festival of Parintins. And I actually got to go this year for the first time. That's gonna be fun. Well, I'll tell y'all all about it after it happens. But every year it's these two teams, and it's 3 nights of presentations of like, it's a big party. It's a big thing. So it's hard to explain it in a concise way. Like the closest thing I can compare it to is Carnival, but it's not. Yeah. It's not like that at all. It's more. Although Carnival's pretty theatrical, but it's more theater. It's more theater than Carnival is.
It has more rules than Carnival does. Carnival is basically like you're there to get lit, right?
Right. I mean, like there's the actual like, there's Carnival like the sort of general festivities, and then there's like the actual like Carnival parades, like the official ones, like in Sao Paulo and in Rio. That those are competitions, where like these different we call them samba schools will present their parade floats and moments and stuff, and then they have like a rubric that they have to follow. And similarly at this festival, there's these 2 main teams, and over the course of 3 nights, they present different floats and numbers, and they have to present different stories and stuff like that. And they have themes, they have songs, and there's a rubric of things that they have to present, like different items that they have to present to different capacities every night.
We have something in Trinidad Carnival as well, where you've got the floats and the bands and everything, and they compete for like who's the best partiers essentially of Carnival. But they also have like Juve, where there'll be a guy who's essentially crowned like king of the carnival, who becomes like the Blue Devil, and you're just like, he's just like pasted head to toe in like blue, and he's like the king for the celebration and that type of thing.
Yeah, so I bring up the Festival of Fighting Chiefs because that's one of the ways that people have found of like keeping a lot of these mythological stories and legends alive, and have like it's become part of our oral tradition, even though like it's an event that is less than 100 years old. They started doing it, I think, in like the 50s or something, the 50s or 60s, and like the festival that it's based around is the it's a period of more partying in Brazil, and mostly in the north of Brazil, called the Boi Bumbá. And the Fighting Chiefs Festival specifically is like the biggest one, and it has its own sort of culture around it and its own thing that they do. And every year, my favorite part is when they present their allegories. We call them alegorias. They're floats and basically like performance numbers of different mythological things. So growing up, one of the ways that I was exposed to these creatures wasn't even so much from like my family talking about it, but it was from watching this show every year, and I see this giant mechanical monkey looking puppet thing, and I turn to my mom and I'm like, hey, what is that? And then she explains them up in Guari. Or I see this beautiful woman in feathers and a little bikini coming down on the head of a giant animatronic snake with like smoke pouring out of its mouth and like music, and it's like, and that's how I learned about the Boyuna or the Cobra Grande, and like different myths and legends about like the those giant lily pads. We call them the Victoria Regis, the Victoria Amazonica, I guess we're gonna call it in English. We call it the Victoria Regis in Brazil, and they're like these giant water lilies, these giant lily pads that are like big enough to like a person can lay in it. And we have a myth a myth around how like those came to be, which is like essentially this like girl fell in love with the moon. She would go to the side of the river every night to go say hi to the moon, I guess. And on the night of a new moon, the moon didn't come out, and she was so sad, she just went into the water and became the lilies. It's kind of weird, silly, but it's like we have a lot of shit like that where it's like explaining why certain things are like that, and they're weirdly always kind of tragic. Like there's the actual guarana fruit. Like if you've ever had the Brazilian soda guarana, it's a fruit, and it's this little. It has a red outer piece, and on the inside it's like this white flesh with a black seed, and it kind of looks like an eyeball.
Okay.
And so we have a legend around how that came to be, and it essentially boils down to a small indigenous boy ran into the forest and died, and his mother buried him under a tree, and then that tree bore these fruit that were the color of his eyes.
Strangely tragic. Yep.
Yeah. And like, if you're, bringing it back to the topic, if you want to incorporate, like, you have a story of something like that, and you want to somehow incorporate it, like, your party is taking a rest by the side of a lake. Whoever's on watch rolls a perception check. They see on the side of the river the sort of ghostly form of a woman on a giant lily pad staring up at the sky. She seems to be crying. It's a night of a new moon. And then, like, you can take it from there. Like, of course, depends on the tone, depends on what it is that you're doing. Like, is this a moment where you can just introduce that little bit of, like, world-building flavor into your setting? Do you have time to do that? Like, do your players let you do that? Because sometimes, there are times where, like, you're at a table and the energy is just not right for that kind of, like, thing. But these are the kind of things where...
for exploration of, non-Western cultures and fantasy.
Yeah.
You might not have that, the right group, depending.
And also, like, sometimes it just works as good inspiration in general, just because, like, you don't have to stay entirely true to the source material.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't care about citing your sources, you could take credit for, like, wow, how did you come up with that? That was so sad. Wow, that's crazy. And you're just like, oh, I'm just a writing genius. It's fine. MBD. Just take credit for it. Who's gonna copyright strike you?
Hearing you talk about it, I'm pretty sure you could make a campaign around that festival, the Parinchis festival that you mentioned, because it's got like its own. It unfolds in a certain way, so I'm thinking like you specifically could write something around that. And that's another note. If you have cultural, exposure and experience from your background, it's not a bad idea to use it in your games if you want to mix it up, if you want to get some new flavor in there.
And hey, let's be real. Some of us who live in the U.S. who are from other places, and we get involved in these games that are baseline very predominantly white and Western, we can sometimes end up kind of disconnected from our home cultures in our hobbies and stuff. And doing that research and looking into that stuff, if it's something that you came from but you're not super familiar with, that can help. And honestly, that like it's part of that, like, therapeutic aspect of the game, where it's like that process of doing that research to pull from it, that can be kind of cathartic as well, of just like bringing you closer to something that your mileage may vary of like how much you identify with where you're from or where your cultural background is, but like it's almost never a bad thing to get back in touch with the things that, like, you're maybe not exposed to on a daily basis if you don't actively seek it.
Oh, yeah. I don't think that there's ever a
decolonize your storytelling, babe. It's good for the soul.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a downside to exposing yourself to your own historical culture or other people's cultures, and just being respectful. I don't think there's ever a downside to that.
Yeah. And if you're a white American person who's like, your background is like Norse and whatever, and like, yeah, your culture's the one that's represented in there, maybe you have somebody at the table who would be delighted and surprised and feel very seen if you were to incorporate aspects of the culture that they're from. Or, be delighted and surprised and feel very seen if you were to talk to them and ask them about it, of like, hey, you're from such and such place. Like, are there any cool, fun, interesting monsters that you like? Or what was the thing that your parents would threaten you with to get you to go to sleep at night?
To make it be good.
Yeah. Like, and would it be cool if, like, you helped me write that into the story? And, because then that helps introduce the rest of your party to it. And, like, it'll help your party, your players, that player in particular, or if you have multiple people in there, like, feel more... Again, it's another tool of, like, helping the party feel more invested in it.
And also taking some work off of you as a dungeon master, where, you get to collab with people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a collaborative storytelling game. And we have this framework, whichever version of the tabletop role-playing game you're playing, it's a framework from which you can build onto. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just see how other people have rolled the wheel before.
How many different coats of paint have been on the car?
Yeah,
the love story, the tragic story, the environmental story,
the conqueror and the protector, and all this and that. Like, yeah, I think we're kind of, we've talked for an hour now of just, and it kind of just all boils down to, there's a lot of stuff out there that you can pull from, and you don't need to stay the narrow path of like what your players would recognize.
And it's okay because like in the base fantasy games, all of them, they've got some version of Cerberus and Manticore and a lot of these, you know, non-copyrightable gods like Zeus and whatnot. So like it's totally okay to like throw in other cultures as well, because those cultures existed at the same time in some cases, or sometimes before. And it's, you know, allowed. Like you can throw in Egyptian, you can throw in Japanese or Brazilian or Trinidadian or you know, creatures or myths and that sort of thing into your game. Like it's, I see the argument a lot of like D&D specific, but like any sort of fantasy system is like, this is an allegory for like medieval Europe and that's it. I'm like, no, like it can be any fantasy, it can be any kind of setup you got here.
Something that you see a lot is like in these sort of medieval fantasies, you'll have like an area of the world that is just like fantasy China, and even then I feel like, okay, if you're gonna do that, explore it. Like I feel like, okay, you're gonna like split it up first of all, because Asia's like a huge thing and there's a lot of different people and cultures that exist in like the part of the world that we call Asia. All right, if you're gonna do fantasy Asia, like
fantasy China is very different from just fantasy Russia.
Yeah, fantasy China is very different from fantasy Japan, from fantasy Korea, from fantasy India. Like, those are from fantasy Philippines. Like, and those all have very, like, okay, you're gonna do fantasy East, fantasy Japan. Japan has a fucking fascinating and absolutely massive compendium of mythological creatures, of yokai, right? This is fucking giant skeleton creatures, and like the Philippines has that one like vampire lady that's just a head and a spinal cord.
Yeah,
terrifying. Like
it's not even spinal cord; it's like the head and like the guts.
The guts, yes, terrifying. Like, okay, if you're gonna do that, commit. Don't just sort of like put some like borderline racist music on and like say that they're wearing like rice patty hats. Like, you know, like do something with it.
Yeah, we're not talking about you specifically, wizards, but like if someone is just because like I
still haven't forgiven wizards for the weird Romani people in Curse of Strahd. All right, like
that's what I'm saying. We're not asking them specifically because them as a company are not very good at interpreting living, like, you know, cultures and things, you know, things that people still worship today. But like, you know, if this is for your home game, the individual can do their research and know what's right for their table.
Yeah. I think that's all that I think that's a great note to leave on.
Yeah.
Is your table is your own.
And
that's really it. That's it. Your table is your own, and you can do whatever you want with it, and like don't be afraid to expand your horizons. And literally.
And if you're from somewhere else, don't be afraid of your own culture.
Don't be afraid of your own culture, and don't be afraid of other people's cultures.
Yeah.
Don't let the fear of like, what if I misinterpret this, stop you from even trying to. Because I feel like in the safety of that group of 5 people that you're playing with, you should feel safe to like, hey, I'm going to explore something that I honestly don't know that much about, but I am trying to learn more about it. And if I fuck it up, these 5 people can keep me in check about it.
Yeah.
Can be like, hey, rather like, what have you considered this? Where like, you're not on TV, you're not publishing books for hundreds of thousands of people to read. You're playing a game with a couple of your friends. So, you know, feel the hope is that like if you're there, then you should feel safe enough to experiment a little bit.
Yeah.
And to explore the world. Because God knows traveling's expensive.
Okay, that's the note we're gonna leave off on. Do you want to give us some plugs to come out with?
Yeah. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Tumblr, barely. Kind of. Yeah, we're there. I'm gonna, on the Tumblr, I'll be reblogging some Invisible City stuff and some Brazilian mythology stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've seen some, like, homebrew, stat block sheets for creatures of different mythologies. That's what
Post
I
those
mostly
up.
do on there, is I'll post, is I usually post, yeah, that's what I've been using the Tumblr for, is, like, posting, like, homebrew stat blocks and cool art and memes and Dimension 20 and Critical Role stuff.
We're also on Facebook and Twitter, technically, even though I cannot get those fucking thumbnails to work on Twitter. I'm still working on it, but God, they're the bane of my existence.
yeah, Twitter's broken, man. It's fine.
Oh, God.
Yeah, we're on the socials. You know, just Google Oops All Dragons. We'll probably show up, hopefully.
And if you want to throw us a buck.
I think our SEO is pretty good.
Yeah.
And if you like what we do and you think, yeah, let's give her $1, give me $1. Go on patreon.com/oopsalldragons. Your $5 gets you access to our private Discord server. You talk to fellow enjoyers of tabletop games and nerdy things.
Stuff we don't post up on YouTube and the other places.
Yeah, we do some exclusive episodes and early access to episodes on there. Yeah, that's us.
Yeah, and my little plug, because they asked. Gaming at tabletop gaming at Flynn's Arcade, Margate, Florida, 441 in Margate Boulevard, every Wednesday and the first Saturday of each month. Go on and have some fun. Look them up. It's a great crowd of folks.
Yeah, it's a great place to go if you live in South Florida and you want to start playing, or like you haven't played in a while and you want a table. Flynn's a great place.
Very, very beginner friendly.
Yeah, great vibes. And I think that's it for us. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Goodbye.
Bye. You just spanked the episode out of existence.
Oops All Dragons is a group effort. Our show is edited by Noel Hernandez, our theme was composed by Brendan Lyons, and our logo art is by Azif On Q. Links to more of their work and their social media will be in the show notes. Find us on YouTube and Spotify, and check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Oops All Dragons.